Okay. Okay, just going to discuss Parshas Balak. Now, of course, but just as this introduction to what I'm going to say, very often I have discussed the double relationship that every Jew has with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We say, Zekeli vanveyu elikeyavi baromimenu. We say in the Shemon Esrei, Elokeinu ve'elikei abaseinu. The God, our God, the God of our fathers. And there are numerous cases where there's reference made to the double relationship that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On one hand, we have the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu based on the perception that we have of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the life of our ancestors, of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and in the past generations, the other past generations as well. On the other hand, we have a personal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu based on the perception of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our own lives. And one would have thought perhaps that chronologically, we should mention first the relationship that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu based on the perception of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the life of our ancestors. And then the personal relationship that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu based on the perception of God in our own lives. But for some reason, most of the time, the order is mentioned in reverse. First, there is mention, and we make mention of the relationship, of the personal relationship we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, based on the perception of God in our own lives, and then we make reference to the perception of God in the life of our ancestors. And years ago, I was asked that question after I gave a share, and what I answered was that sometimes after we undergo certain experiences, we have a much clearer perception of God in the life of our ancestors. And I think that that's true today. We read about the enemies who have attacked the Jewish people throughout the generations. But when we see it in our own time, we're able to get a better understanding about what happened in the past. It's true. The past, my savo, siman labanim, that the past is a map for what's going to happen to us. But likewise, what happens to us gives us a better understanding, a clearer understanding of what happened to our ancestors. And I think because of this, it's sometimes worthwhile some of the things that we have said in the past, because when we said it in the past, it was based on the perception that we had at that time. But with the events that have happened lately, we could see that the past is perhaps giving us a clearer direction, a clearer instruction, a clearer vindication of how to perceive the present. But we're only able to do that because of the experiences that we have in the present. Now, Parshas Balak discusses about Bilam Harasha, Bilam the wicked one. Bilam is considered one of the greatest Rishaim of all times. And on the other hand, Bilam was a prophet for the nations of the world. And the question is asked, why was Bilam given nevuah, Bilam of Russia? And we will discuss that. Now, Bilam was, I guess, hired is the best word by Balak to curse the Jewish people. Because since God communicated with Bilam, in spite of his wickedness, the nations of the world looked up to Bilam. And they considered him as a man who had special connections with God. And when Balak was frightened about the Jewish people approaching his country and seeing what the Jewish people, how the Jewish people defeated the other enemies that it encountered, he went to Bilam and he asked Bilam to curse the Jewish people because of the special communication. I do not want to use the term relationship, but the special communication that Bilam on occasions had with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God. And it's very interesting that he approached, that Balak, the king of Moab, approached Bilam for this task, even knowing that the Jewish people were the nation of God. Yes, partially it's due because they knew that Bilam had some connection, some communication with God, the God of Israel. And to a large degree, I assume it was based on frustration, desperation, and knowing not what else they could do to eliminate the threat of the success of the Jewish people. And Bilam goes back and forth with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God, asking God to give him permission to curse the Jewish people. And God tells him, don't go. And then, so God allows him to go, but warns him against cursing the Jewish people. And the Jewish people are not capable of being cursed, ki baruch hu, because they are blessed. But nevertheless, Bilam loses contact with reality, chooses to lose contact with reality. And he goes ahead, just maybe, he will have this opportunity to curse the Jewish people. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns the curses that Bilam tries to place upon the Jewish people into blessings. And of course, then at that point, after trying time and time again, Balak sends Bilam home. And the Gemara in Bava Basra discusses the different books of Tanakh who wrote it. So the Gemara uses the expression Moshe Kosab Sifro. Moshe wrote his book. The book is the Chumash, Chamisha Chumshei Torah, Uparshas Bilam, and the Parsha Bilam, the chapter of Bilam. And the question is asked by many, the chapter of Bilam, that's part of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. So why does the Gemara say that Moshe Kosab Sifra, Moshe wrote the 5 books, the 5 Chumashim, and the Parsha Bilam? The Parsha Bilam is part of the Chumash of Bamidbar. It's part of the Torah. It's part of the 5 books. It would have been enough for the Gemara to say Moshe Kosab Sifro, Moshe wrote the Chumash. Parshas Bilam is included in it. And Reb Chaim said, to answer that question, the definition of Torah is that which was given to Moshe Rabbeinu. But Parshas Bilam became Torah even before Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it down in the Torah. It had the status of Torah as the words of the brachos left Bilam's mouth, as the blessings that Bilam didn't want to give, that he was forced to give, that was put into his mouth against his will by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They had the status of Torah as they left Moshe Rabbeinu's mouth. As they left Bilam's mouth. Even before Moshe Rabbeinu repeated it and wrote it down. So that's why it says Moshe Kosab Sifro Parshas Bilam, because there were parts of Parshas Bilam that were Torah even before it was written down by Moshe Rabbeinu. And the question is, why was it necessary? And Reb Chaim also used this idea to explain a Yalkut Shimoni. The Yalkut Shimoni, Mizos HaBracha, says, Lo kam b'Yisrael kamoshe. They did not arise among the Jewish people like Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Yalkut Shimoni says, Lo kam b'Yisrael. They did not arise among the Jewish people like Moshe Rabbeinu, but among the nations of the world. There was a person who, in regard to something, in regard to one thing, did something that usually is identified solely with Moshe Rabbeinu. And who is that? That's Bilam HaRasha, Bilam the wicked one. And Reb Chaim explained, Torah is Torah because it was given to Moshe. But the brachos that Bilam said against his will became Torah when they left Bilam's mouth. So Lo kam b'Yisrael did not arise among the Jewish people like Moshe. Torah is defined only by Moshe Rabbeinu. But the brachos that Bilam was forced to give became Torah when they left Bilam's mouth. And the obvious question is, why is it that way? Now Reb Chaim said it's obvious that there is a difference between Well, I think, I think that the reason is our sages tell us that why is it that Bilam was given nevuah, was given prophecy? Because the nations of the world should not have a claim against God. God, you show favoritism to the Jewish people. If you had given us prophets like Moshe Rabbeinu, then we would have been like the Jewish people. So because of that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave prophecy to Bilam. So the nations of the world should not have that claim, should not be able to make that claim. Now, Reb Chaim says, however, it's a very simple, that there was a big distinction between Bilam and Moshe Rabbeinu. Bilam, according to our sages, well, Bilam, Reb Chaim said, I heard two different versions. One version, I heard from my father Zatzal, and the other I saw brought in a sefer. And in truth, the two versions really express the same idea. Obviously, one time Reb Chaim expressed it one way, and another time he expressed it the other way. But it's the same thought. The way I heard it from my father, Bilam was God's phonograph. And Moshe Rabbeinu gave over prophecy, not as an object, but as a person, and because of the nature of the person that he was. And then I saw in a sefer, and apparently in another occasion, Reb Chaim explained it that way. He says we have a difference between an ambassador and the postman. Both deliver messages, but it's altogether different. When an ambassador delivers a message, for the most part, he is involved in the message itself. The way he gives it over, he's part of the message. When a postman gives a message, he has no relationship to the message. The message is the message, and the messenger is not related to the message at all. Bilam was a messenger, but he was unrelated to the message itself. He was God's phonograph. He was God's postman. But Moshe Rabbeinu was God's ambassador. And I think to a certain degree, we could say that what is true of the nevuah, the difference between the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu and the nevuah of Bilam, to a lesser degree, of course, on both sides, is true about the way Torah is taught. Torah is a message, but Torah has to be given over through a Masorah. I was told that by my brother that when he once visited Reb David Soloveichik Zatzal, the the uh, the son of the Brisker Rav, and discussion. They were talking about someone who teaches Talmud, Gemara, at one of the universities in Israel. Apparently, both of them knew who this person was. I don't know how the discussion came to be about them. And Reb David said, he says, it's not Torah. What did it mean it's not Torah? The person is explaining the Gemara. But the question is, and I don't know that that was the case with this person. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't even know who the person was. If Torah is taught as history, there's a lot of history that can be deduced from the Gemara, from Tanakh. It's taught as sociology, the study of ancient societies. And there's a lot that can be deduced from that perspective, from the Torah and from the Gemara as well. Then it's not Torah. It's only if it's taught as part of the Masorah that it is Torah. You can say, we're learning the same block Gemara, the same page of Gemara. I don't know that that's always true. In fact, most of the time, it probably isn't true. But taught by Masorah means that the Rebbe is part of the Gemara. He's part of the Torah. He isn't just a phonograph. He isn't just a tape recorder. He is there to give direction. And very often, when a Talmud will tell over what he learned, it isn't just that he's giving over the words. He isn't just giving over the ideas. But a Rebbe will sometimes say, and this is how my Rebbe said it. And this is the point that he emphasized. And this is the expressions that were on his face. Because I'll tell us that Yehoshua accompanied Moshe Rabbeinu to Mount Sinai part way. And Rashi says, Liadati mativo sheYehoshua kan. I don't know. Then he offers an explanation. What is the purpose of Yehoshua accompanying Moshe, or of the Torah mentioning it? And I think the answer is very simple. Rashi suggests something different. But Moshe Rabbeinu, his essence was Torah. It wasn't just the words that he said was Torah. His expressions were Torah. The feelings and the emotions that he expressed was also part of the Torah. And sometimes expressions and feelings can't be given over. Even with the machines, words can be given over. Especially the feeling between a Talmud and a Rebbe. By machines, you have feelings to the machine. So Yoshua was the one through whom Moshe gave the Torah to future generations of Klal Yisrael. And the expressions at Moshe's face, the feelings that emanated from Moshe at that time, that Yoshua was able to perceive as he accompanied part of the Torah. A phonograph cannot give those feelings over. And the Medrash Torah tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai, there were beams of light that emanated from his face, and Moshe Rabbeinu had to cover his face. But when he taught Torah, he raised the cover up. Why did he raise the cover up? But Moshe Rabbeinu was like a Sefer Torah. When we learn Torah, when we read from the Torah, we uncover the Torah. But when we're not reading from the Torah, when we're not learning from the Torah is covered up. And Moshe Rabbeinu was a Sefer Torah. It wasn't just the words that were a Sefer Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu, his Nevuah, he was part of the Nevuah. He was part of the Torah. And to a much lesser degree, every Rabbi and to his Talmud has to be part of the Torah that he teaches. And that is part of the idea, of Masorah. And I mentioned many times, the Beis Halevi mentions the Medrash that if the Jewish people hadn't made an Egel Hazav, if they hadn't made a golden calf, so there would not have been a Torah Sheba'al Peh. There would not have been the oral Torah. The Beis Halevi says that's not possible. What? Wouldn't have been an oral Torah? I mean, ayin tachas ayin would have meant lahalacha mamish. But he says a large part of the oral Torah would have been in the written Torah. So then the question is, so why is it that because of the Egel Hazav, because of the golden calf, parts of the oral Torah that would have been put in the written Torah were not put in the written Torah? What was the lesson? What was the association with the golden calf for that? And I mentioned, I don't remember if the Beis Halevi said that or I added it to what the Beis Halevi said, that what did the Egel Hazav, the incident at Egel Hazav, Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to the mountain for 40 days. And after 40 days, the Jewish people, 40 days earlier, said Na'aseh v'nishma, who were at the height, the spiritual height that man ever achieved. Stand in front of a golden calf and say, Elu Elohecha Yisrael, this is your God, O Israel. What did that show? That demonstrated the need for a Rebbe, the need for a teacher. If everything is written down, you don't need a teacher. If everything is on tapes, tapes do serve an important purpose. They help you learn Torah. But you need a Masorah also to accompany it. The teacher has to be part of the Torah, just like the Navi, like Moshe Rabbeinu was part of the Nevuah, part of the Torah. And when we make a siyum, we say that the Masechta shouldn't leave me, and I shouldn't leave the Masechta, because every time I learn Torah, especially Torah Sheba'al Peh, anytime anybody learns Torah, if he learns it in the proper way, with the proper attitude, he becomes part of the Torah. He becomes part of the Masechta. So, in a certain sense, the difference between Moshe Rabbeinu and Bilam Arasha, in the way they gave over Nevuah, in the way they were given Nevuah, is really a lesson for us and how we have to learn Torah. But we have to understand, why is it that Bilam Arasha was chosen? Bilam Arasha was the ultimate wicked person among the nations of the world. Okay, there was a special need to have a Navi, to have a prophet for the nations of the world. But why Bilam Arasha? There were others who certainly were not on the wicked level of Bilam Arasha. The others were probably some Chasidei Umos Olam. Why was Bilam Arasha chosen to be the symbol of Nevuah, prophecy of a prophet for the nations of the world? So most Mefarshim explain it. That's the simple explanation. That because Bilam Arasha was the one the nations of the world looked up to. And because they would demand the prophet, it had to be someone that they respected, one that they looked up to. I want to suggest two other explanations. One explanation I've suggested before. The Rambam, when he talks about prerequisite for prophecy, he speaks of two prerequisites. One is moral perfection, and the other is intellectual perfection. I want to suggest that there was no one among Dumas Holam at that time who had the moral perfection that was necessary for that position. But Bilam was the intellect par excellence. He was the ultimate scholar among the nations of the world. Of course, Kina, Taiva, V'kavod, Motzina, Sodom, and Olam. Even the greatest genius, the greatest intellect, can lose contact with reality. You see, Bilam Arasha, the great intellect of his time, he's so determined to curse the Jewish people that when he hits his donkey and the donkey starts talking to him, he doesn't say, "What's going on here?" But he answers the donkey back. We learn something about intellect. Don't think intellects are in control of themselves. Intellectuals might understand mathematics very well. They might understand many forms of wisdom very well. But when kina, taiva, and kavod, when jealousy, desire, and seeking of high regard creeps into them, and usually we find among intellectuals that happens more often than it doesn't. then in spite of their intellectual achievement, they can act in a most foolish manner, in a manner that only someone who loses contact with reality, someone who in a sense has the experiences of alcoholics, even without drinking, has. So Bilam was chosen because morally he was a zero, but there was no one who had moral perfection or anywhere near it among the nations of the world. So in choosing a Navi for the nations of the world, God chose the one that was the intellect of the generation. And to a certain degree, that's not different than the answer that I gave, that I mentioned before, that most Mepharshim gave, because that's what they had high regard for. They had high regard for intellectual achievement, and they were not concerned about moral achievement. And I want to suggest a third thing, a third reason why the whole episode of Bilam was necessary, not just for that generation, but for another reason. Bilam was the spiritual leader of the nations of the world. He was a spiritual leader. And of course, we know that he violated all the basic mitzvahs of the Torah. But nevertheless, he had, again, I don't want to use the word relationship, but he had communication, a connection with God for whatever reason. And many of the Avodah Zarah religions of that time looked up to Bilam. He was like the high priest of the nations of the world at that time. And unfortunately, today, we have high priests, and many of the religions today have become influenced by Judaism. They see themselves as an outgrowth, and some even see themselves as the replacement, the new Israel. And their leaders are considered spiritual leaders. But they are spiritual leaders like Bilam HaRasha. Bilam HaRasha wanted to destroy the Jewish people. He gave advice to Midian and to Moab how to destroy the Jewish people. Ultimately, he met his end with that also. And the same thing is going on today. We see spiritual leaders, so-called spiritual leaders, who talk in the name of God, who speak in a clandestine manner in favor of those who are trying to destroy the Jewish people, who speak on their behalf, who are really trying to withdraw the ability of the Jewish people to defend themselves. Leaders of other religions They try to consider themselves as leaders of a peace movement. But it's a peace movement that wants to destroy the Jew. It's a peace movement that talks against the Jews defending themselves instead of talking against the nations of the world, the Hamas, who took young little children and put them in an oven in front of their mothers, who raped Jewish women. They'll speak about women's rights. And sometimes the latter word. It didn't happen in a vacuum, like those who do talk about it. But it was the fault of the Jews that all these things happened. Translated into English. And unfortunately, even among the Jewish people, there are those that are impressed with the Bilams of today. Those who are impressed with the intellectuals of today on the university campuses, who openly demonstrate against the Jewish people for defending themselves, who openly demonstrate that the Hamas murderers should be able to murder the Jewish people. The contemporary Nazis. And there are people that are so impressed with these spiritual leaders, with these intellectual giants. They are spiritual leaders like Bilam. They're intellectual giants like Bilam. But after all said and done, it's Bilam Harasha. We look down at him. We don't look up at him. And unfortunately, those that look up to these people, they are aiding the enemies of the Jewish people. And I think this was it. Bilam, in order that the nations of the world shouldn't have a claim. So God gave him a certain, according to Reb Chaim, when words emanated from his mouth, he didn't want to say those words. But it became Torah when it left his mouth. He had a high status. But it wasn't who he really was. It wasn't. It was just, he was an intellectual. He was a fraudulent spiritual leader, claiming to do the bidding of God, but thinking that he controlled the word of God. And we have to understand today, we cannot be impressed. We have to learn a lesson. Because we see today that spiritual leaders talk against the Jewish people. Intellectuals talk against the Jewish people. And there are some that even today are awed by the garbage, the nonsense that these people say. But we have to know, and even those of us that are not awed by it, that recognize the Bilam Harushas of today, we have to remember that for the future. The Parsha Bilam tells us something about today, and it should tell us something about tomorrow. We cannot be awed. Al Yishalel Chacham b'Chachmaso, Al Yishalel Ashir b'Ashro. We cannot be awed by people who have wisdom. Chachma b'goyim tamin. We cannot be awed by people who have money. But only those that really Yodea Osi, that experience my presence. That's the lesson that we have to have. We shouldn't think because someone is intellectually is on a higher level, on the contrary, is on a lower level. We shouldn't think because someone is a spiritual level that invokes the name of God, he is on a higher level. When he does everything that's considered an abomination, when he's determined to destroy the Jewish people, we have to know it now, and we have to remember it for the future. That's the lesson of Parshas Bilam.
If anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. Did I miss if Bilam was alive, would he be the president of Columbia or Harvard? Or would he be the head of the UN?
It would be the head of the UN. Nothing is in a vacuum. They should change their title to Chancellor of the UN.